All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 307 of the Restoring Rapport podcast. We're super excited for the content we got planned up for you guys today, as always. This is a podcast for young believers who are pursuing the goal of marriage and family and trying to get married as young as possible in a healthy way. I'm your host, Seth. I come on twice a week, every week on Thursday and Sunday, to discuss not only the benefits of getting married young, but I attempt to equip and encourage you in your pursuit of that goal. And today we're going to be reviewing a video by Mike Winger entitled One Unbiblical Belief That Will Kill Your Marriage. I actually have watched this video before, and so I know it's going to be something good that I should review on the show. And basically, it's going to come down to this idea that I'm excused from my poor choices if you're also making poor choices, or I am not going to make good choices in this marriage unless you are going to make good choices in this marriage. And that type of transactional bargaining, instead of choosing to make a good decision no matter what is going to land your future marriage in a lot of problems. And so what I would like for this show to be for you is like the premarital counseling I wish my wife and I would have had prior to getting married, because there's lots of premarital counseling out there. Some of it's good, and some of it's bad, and some of it's good, and it just doesn't benefit your particular marriage. And so you got to really pick marriage counseling that's catered to you as individually as possible. And so, sure, there are universal norms, universal truths, and universal good ideas about getting married and how to do that correctly. But there's also a lot of variation in personality and life story and the uniqueness of your own personal marriage. And so you've got to pick those mentors in your life who are where you want to be and ask those people for directions. And so hopefully, if you're like me, this podcast will generate a lot of value for you. Without further ado, let's go ahead and see what Mike Winger says is the one biblical belief that will kill your marriage.
So this is huge. Marriage often heads off a cliff because of one single unchristian belief. I won't do my part if they won't do their part.
Let's go to question one. Marriage is really difficult. She writes, I'm tired of arguing and fighting about everything. I just want to be single again where I can live in peace.
Yikes.
I'm about to leave my marriage, what do I do? How do I enjoy my marriage when I just don't even want to be married?
Yeah. It's tough to answer this kind of question
I know.
from this perspective, because I want to find the person and say, just talk for like an hour and let's just listen. But the first thing I think is, you want out, and my heart breaks at that, because I actually start to wonder, is there anything I say that can help at this point? Because you can reach a level of exasperation where reason and solutions and all that are actually annoying, because all you want is an escape hatch. And so my encouragement would be, slow down, because your tiredness and your frustration could have you making a decision in the midst of that is a bad decision. And I would instead want you to refocus upon the Lord. And if that sounds like, then that's even all the more why you've got to do it. But let's talk first about being tired of fighting. Marriage doesn't require arguing and fighting about everything, but there are plenty of marriages where that happens. When I was growing up, the arguments between my mother and my stepdad were so long that they had to take bathroom breaks.
Yikes.
And they were loud. And there was just yelling, and it was like, I guess we're not watching TV tonight, we're just waiting in the room.
And that is sadly a common norm within Christian marriages. A lot of times you'll have a lot of yelling and strife and just basically a lack of respect between the partners. And, I don't think that's the way it should be. And I think it is totally possible to have a marriage without that constant disrespect and constant yelling. And I know that's actually possible because my wife and I are in one such relationship, I am pleased to report. And so just because, and I'll see you on year 30 if you think that we're just in that situation because we're newlyweds, because it is not just a life situation you find yourself in. It's the result of a series of choices you've made in your marriage to get to the place that you are. Just like everything in life, if you want a marriage where there's no yelling, then you have to intentionally cultivate that and refuse to allow any sort of disrespect to be voiced on your end, because you don't control your spouse, but you do control what you do. And so if you want a marriage free of yelling, it's your responsibility to make sure you never yell at your partner. But my point being, it is totally possible to have a strife-free marriage like that. I do think it's good to have conflict and like work things out with your partner, and you can't really do that without a conflict of ideas that are being voiced to each other, and that's great. But like you do so in a respectful way. Mike Winger, I was actually trying to Google some things about him while I was waiting for you guys. I don't know what his denomination is, but I've watched a lot of his YouTube videos, and I'm just going to pull up a little info on him here for you. He is at one, oh, he was at one time a pastor, but what he does now is he does a lot of YouTube videos, and you can look at him here. His channel is just Mike Winger. He does biblical breakdown videos, really good videos. In my opinion, I've watched a lot of them. Now, I do disagree with him on some issues of like he is really quick to condemn people as false prophets when I actually don't think that a lot of the people he condemns are false prophets, especially because I've been to the churches of some of the people he's condemned, and I find them to be really churches who are quite in line with the kingdom of God. And so I wouldn't recommend his some of his videos that are condemning pastors who as false prophets, who in reality I think are not. And I think that's sadly a mistake that a lot of the church is making. I know we are told in Scripture that we're warned against false prophets and to be constantly on the lookout for them and be vigilant and aware of what is going in our ears. Yes, but it's also such a thing as like pulling the trigger too much and labeling people false prophets simply because we disagree with them on A, B, or C issue. And I think that is totally antithetical to the unity that Paul describes as important for the body of Christ. And so you really want to make sure you're not shooting a fellow genuine believer in the foot with your YouTube videos. And so that's why I would be a little bit skeptical of those videos he's done, but I really like a lot of his other videos. I would particularly recommend his scriptural breakdown videos where he goes down verse by verse through chapters of the Bible. Those are really, really good. I like exegetical passages or exegetical videos where the pastor or speaker will literally go verse by verse through scripture. I think that's really cool. So check out him out for sure. This video so far seems like a pretty great video to me. Just highlighting, understanding that yes, people can find themselves in a situation where they don't want to be in their marriage anymore. They've made decisions to the point that they really are not thriving in their marriage and they want a way out. And I like how he acknowledged that any advice that you kind of give that person who's in that situation without being very careful is going to be perceived as someone shouting from a high horse and perhaps telling you something that you really don't want to do and you really see problems with. And so I'm sure marriage counselors find themselves in a hard situation all the time where these couple people come to them with problems they're having, looking for a solution, but the question comes up as to whether or not they're really looking for a solution. Some people are just looking for a way out of the miserable situation that they've constructed for themselves. And so nothing you're going to say is actually going to be able to get them to start taking the steps to fix the construction they've made. I like how he highlighted that. And hopefully he'll highlight here that it is possible to have a marriage, and I would say it is important to have a marriage that is not in that place. I mean, marriage is good for you, not because you find yourself in a situation one day where you want to out. It's good for you because it's good for you if you make good decisions in that marriage.
And that's the norm of that marriage. It was always just this sort of, fighting and arguing all the time. And I think for the Christian, the only solution is stop your part of the fighting, because you can't control the other person, like Sean McDowell kept saying.
Right.
And so you stop your part of the fighting, which is to say, like James says, that wisdom that's from above is willing to yield.
Wow.
That's
good.
Brilliant wisdom in marriage. Willing to yield. And that goes to both ways. Husbands, wives. Husbands, when you yield to your wife, you're not abandoning your role as a leader. That's wisdom that can be from above. Proverbs 17:14. Here's a great proverb for us on this. The beginning of strife is like the releasing of water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. Releasing water here is like the breaking of a dam. So it's like a dam cracks. And everybody knew, if you saw a picture of a dam or video of a dam cracked, you'd be like,
I want to get that exact quote
before
from a second ago.
Starts. Releasing water here is like the releasing of water. When you yield to your wife, you're not abandoning your role. It's brilliant wisdom in marriage. Willing to yield. Stop your part of the fighting, which is to say, like James says, that wisdom that's from above is willing to yield. That's brilliant wisdom in marriage. Willing to yield. And that goes to both ways. Husbands, wives. Husbands, when you yield to your wife, you're not abandoning your role as a leader. That's wisdom that can be from above.
It's James 3:17. That's where he's talking about. I'm going to read that with you guys here. An absolutely awesome verse there. Wisdom is being willing to yield. Wisdom from above is being willing to yield. I think that's really good, and something sadly that is not in a lot of marriages today, not because not on the side of one side or the other, but because human nature is to get what you want when you want it and how you want it, and people will fight for their selfish desires if they've not matured into the state of being that makes marriage a comfortable living situation. And so marriage is kind of forced maturity, guys. I've said that over and over on the show. A lot is going to be asked of you once you get married that was not asked of you prior to getting married. Even if you're a member of a healthy family where boundaries are in place and things were asked of you, it was not as much. When I was growing up in a family, there was a lot asked of me, but it was nowhere near what is asked of me now as the person who's charged with the responsibility of taking care of my family. It's not even close. I was asked to clean the house, keep my room clean, get good grades in school, show respect to honor my father and mother, facilitate good social lives, or facilitate a good social life for myself, and make decisions toward my future. That's what was asked of me when I was young. Now what is asked of me is being the person responsible for my wife eating, and being the person responsible for putting a roof over my family's head, and putting food on the table for my family, and being the spiritual leader of my home, and making leading my family into places that are good for them, and things like that. Those are much harder to do than simply making my bed and keeping my room clean. That's what's asked of you when you're a child, but what's asked of you once you enter a marriage is going to be much greater. So it's kind of forced maturity. Because your options upon entering a marriage are either sink or swim. You can choose to remain selfish and not answer what is being asked of you in marriage and embrace the suffering that will follow from that, or you can choose to suffer for the sake of others into a process of maturity that will then make the rest of your life easy. That's really your options in marriage. And I really, really encourage you guys to choose the latter, because if you don't, you're going to be suffering for not only a lot more, but your life is it's not going to be very good. The quality of your marriage is not going to be very good if you're unwilling to lay your life down for your partner. And I really like this verse, and so I'm glad that he brought that up. It says, James 3:17 says, "But the wisdom from above is pure, then peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial, free of hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown by peace, by those who make peace." Beautiful verse. Again, I'll read it. "But the wisdom from above is pure, then peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial, free of hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown by peace, by those who make peace." Being a peacemaker, the Beatitudes and Jesus' teachings on this may come up in this video, but I do think that this is important just because I've seen the havoc that can be wreaked by discord in my own personal life, and not in my marriage, obviously, but other areas of my life. I've seen the consequences of people who allow peacemaking to become less than a priority in their relationships. And, a lot of this practically peacemaking to me looks like avoiding conversations or directions that are going to create strife. So Thanksgiving just passed. We all have people in our family who think differently than we do on A, B, or C issue. And peacemaking at the Thanksgiving table, I think, looks like avoiding topics that are going to lead to emotional anxiety rising, and therefore make it harder for people to make responsible decisions and keep the peace and be respectful to people who are of an alternate perspective to themselves. So I don't talk about politics at Thanksgiving. I don't talk about politics really anytime that I'm in a politically diverse group. You can say that that's cowardice and that that's not sticking up for the truth, or you can look at it from the perspective of peace is my ultimate priority within that gathering, and I am not going to be the instigator of problems and fights and strife and quarrels. That's not what I'm going to do. And so I found this to be a really good means of keeping peace is, and you can say it's running from specific issues if you want, and in which case, go ahead, man, live however you want. But if you want to take my advice, if you know that a conversation is going to be unproductive and unhelpful for one or both parties involved, like, don't enter the conversation. Talk about something else. Talk about something that's going to produce. The Bible says, think about things that are pure, noble, lovely, excellent, admirable, or praiseworthy. So, like, you let your conversation show that. I know there's a point. I know there's a time for everything, and there's a time for political discourse or the discourse around controversial or difficult issues, which is great. But I think, sadly, a lot of people don't have the emotional regulation and control necessary to enter those conversations and come out the other side with both parties intact and having shown respect and peacemaking. And so if you can't do that, don't start the conversation. That's just a couple, and that definitely applies to your marriage as well. I'm not saying you should ignore issues necessarily, but I am saying that you should not allow peacemaking to become less than a priority. You should not introduce discord into your marriage simply for the sake of tackling a difficult issue or proving to your spouse that they're wrong or something like that. That is not how I believe we're called to live as believers. So let's see what else Mike Winger says here. Totally agree with him so far, though.
Proverbs 17:14. Here's a great proverb for us on this. The beginning of strife is like the releasing of water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts.
So good.
Releasing water here is like the breaking of a dam. So it's like a dam cracks. And everybody knew, if you saw a picture of a dam or video of a dam cracked, you'd be like, uh-oh. You know what's happening next. And so notice this moment in your relationship, your marriage, where the quarrel starts, because it probably starts before you realize you're in a fight. Right? It started in little tiny irritations here and there, just a little, the sigh, the look, the glance, the wanting to, that kind of response.
And this is something that you guys can avoid early. Like, the beauty of me getting to you young, while you're young, 80% of this show's, actually more like 75% of the show's listeners are young men, ages 18 to 24, who are looking to develop themselves as a healthy spouse for their wife. And the beautiful thing about hitting you now is you can actually choose the things that are going to cause problems in your marriage instead of just sort of finding them out. And that's the beauty of being able to choose your spouse, guys. If you marry somebody and they are totally, not aligned with the vision that God has laid for your life, I would say that's being, to use Jesus's words, unequally yoked. And you get to decide from the get-go if you're going to be unequally yoked on A, B, or C issue or in general before you get married. That's the beauty of it. You can sit down and know what you need to know about a person, a marriage prospect, prior to entering a committed relationship with him or her. You can know everything you need to know. All you have to do is ask them the questions about the things that are a big deal. That's all you got to do. Ask your spouse, your potential marriage prospect, their opinion, their stance on A, B, or C issue that is a big deal to you before you start entering committed and serious dating relationships with them. That's all you have to do. I knew everything I needed to know about my wife prior to entering the dating relationship with her. We had discussed every serious issue that could cause major problems prior to beginning our relationship. And the beauty of that is, that there's going to be no deal breakers in the future that come up because you've already addressed those prior to starting the relationship. So you need to sit down, guys. And here's the thing. You've got lots of time now. You got lots, not in the sense of, I'm not encouraging you to postpone getting married. I'm actually encouraging you to use the time that you have while you don't have a person to make a list, essentially, of the things that you know could be potential problems in your future marriage, and then address those with the person that you see as a marriage prospect prior to entering a defined and committed relationship with him or her.
If you can just take your part out of the equation, the whole argument could stop. It doesn't mean there isn't still disagreement. Doesn't mean you guys are unified, but you didn't have that moment of chaos and wounding each other in that marriage, in that moment. Proverbs 20 verse 3 says this: "It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife, but every fool will be quarreling."
Wow.
Now, you can't control the foolishness, the foolery of the other person, but you can control your own and say, I'm out. Like, I'm not out of the marriage, I'm out of the argument.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sheesh.
And
That's so good.
This is a skill where you develop like a radar that goes off that gives you the ability to see the argument coming around the corner before it rears its ugly head and you just stop your part. But that doesn't answer this full question, because there's a much bigger issue about marriage, which is, the person asks, how do I enjoy my marriage? And I'd say enjoyment is important, and this is something that Sean has said and Alan has said. Your enjoyment of your marriage is important, but it's not the purpose of the marriage. It's not the primary purpose of the marriage. It's one of the reasons. Like, you don't go into it thinking like, I hope this hurts. But it's not like the purpose, right? So there's two central aspects to a Christian marriage that are not present in a worldly marriage, generally speaking at least.
Now, I do want to know kind of how this conversation ties in, because like I understand that there's a time for standing up for the truth and overturning the tables and the temple, so to speak. But I also know there's a time for blessed are the peacemakers, right? For they will inherit the earth, they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the people who do not create strife. Like he just said, Proverbs 23 says, avoiding strife is an honor for a person, but any fool will start a quarrel. And I've often perceived this as cowardice, guys. And I don't know about you, but this is often presented to me within Christian circles, avoiding strife, as postponing the problem for later and taking the coward's way out, the easy way out, and embracing a harder tomorrow. That's what it's phrased to me as, usually in the Christian circles that I'm in. And people will say things like, if you don't know how to do conflict, if you don't know how to, solve a problem that's hard, instead of putting it off, you will land yourself in a hard situation later. And I mean, I think there is some truth there, but I also know that avoiding strife is an honor for a person and leads to, is the narrow way. It's hard to avoid strife sometimes, right? And I think if you've got a lid on it, man, if you got control of your tongue and you're never going to let peacemaking become not your priority, you're in good shape. And that's a way to have a good marriage. And it's not being a coward. It's not like, letting truth become, a matter of, it's not like you're not sticking up for the truth by not entering that discussion that is not going to be productive. It's simply making peacemaking a priority. Okay. Nobody's asking you to disown what you believe is true. What I think you should do, and what I think will help your marriage or your relationship, is, again, showing respect and not picking battles that will not go anywhere good. I think that's definitely sound marriage advice. Again, Proverbs says it best: avoiding strife is an honor for a person, but any fool will quarrel. And I think what a lot of times we do in marriage and even in other relationships is we quarrel, over trivial issues because we simply want to be right. And that's what will endanger your marriage.
The first is that a marriage you think of as between you and your spouse, and you tend to think of it as it serves you. This is just our natural selfish. This is why I'm wired that way too, right? I tend to think of how it serves me. But the third person in the marriage is God. Now, he's not married to you. He stands above your marriage as the ultimate purpose of your marriage, and the person who's involved in it, in at least your part of the marriage, if not your spouse's part of the marriage. So the Christian husband or wife has a person they care about beyond themselves or their spouse. And this was like the rallying cry of the early church. This got them in trouble with Caesar and Rome and all this other stuff, is because they kept saying things like, Jesus is Lord. But that's the theme of my marriage. And should I say this? Maybe I can't speak for my whole marriage because I can't control my spouse. That's the theme for my part of my marriage. Jesus is Lord. And that, when you bring that into it,
I like the personal responsibility that he's constantly going back to. It's like, okay, you don't get to decide what your spouse does. You're not your spouse's brain. You can't make him or her make certain decisions. What you can do is control yourself and make sure you're making the right decisions. Again, personal responsibility, guys. If people knew how to take personal responsibility for the decisions they're making, this world would be so much better off. Blame starts happening, and therefore a passivity starts taking root, because if somebody's able to blame someone else for the relational messes that he or she finds herself in, it's going to make it really easy on that person's conscience, and they're not going to be incentivized or motivated to make better choices in their future. And they really there's no prompting to become better if they can always blame somebody else for the messes that they are constantly surrounded by. And if it's never your fault, you're just going to keep doing the same things wrong over and over and over and over, never realizing that, holy cow, if I actually changed my approach here and took some humility and acknowledged that this is actually, I'm in this situation because of a decision I made instead of because of the decision somebody else has made, I can actually change that decision and make a better one in the future. I have the power to control the outcomes that are happening in my life, but simply by making good decisions and following, I would say, the way of Jesus. You know, you're responsible to live as God has called you to live. Your wife's not responsible to make you live right. And you're not responsible to make your wife live right. You're responsible to make sure you are walking in alignment with the will of God.
It kind of changes your perspective, because now me being dissatisfied with the marriage, I have to then ask, but Jesus is Lord, so how does he want me to handle the situation? And it changes everything. So you do all things as unto the Lord because he bought you with a price. I mean, what I'm saying is, husband, wife, when you feel exasperated and you feel like I'm just done, I'm over it, you need to look to Jesus on the cross and ask if the price he paid, his death on the cross, was worthy of my obedience in my marriage. Because like Paul says, and the way he says it to the Corinthians is kind of crazy, because he goes, don't you guys know your body's not your own? Think about it. He had to ask it like a question, because he saw their behavior and he thought, maybe there's like this fundamental truth about being a Christian that you haven't grasped. The lordship of Jesus, that he bought you with a price, and therefore you should glorify God with your body, right? With yourself, which belongs to him. And so we get this in marriage too. If you notice the instruction to husbands and wives, there's a few really interesting peculiarities that are different than what you'd read about in the ancient world. One of them is the reason behind the instruction. So in Ephesians 5:22, it says, wives, submit to your own.
And like that verse is a prime example of what I'm talking about by peacemaking here. Like Paul was clearly being very confrontational and assertive in correcting that church on that specific issue. When he said, don't you know that your body is not your own? You've been bought with a price. You're the temple of the Holy Spirit, all this. He's correcting. Again, because he's seeing poor decision-making and stepping in and saying, you're making the wrong choice, and here's the way of life, walk in it. It's like an instruction. It's a correction. And there's a time for that, right? But I don't think the time for that is, in there. That's a very situational good decision. That's only a good decision in specific situations. Like if you were to just say that to your partner who you think is not doing what you want, that's how strife comes up. If you're to point blank say you're making the wrong choice and that's why we're in this mess, again, absolving yourself of personal responsibility and blaming the other person, that's when fights start, is when you blame somebody else. And you point blank try to control them and correct them, turn them into yourself, make them make a decision that you would make. That's when you get in trouble. If you just manage your own self, I think that is a good recipe for marriage. And again, I know there's time for correction, but I think it's very situational. I think what Paul did with the church there is very not. I don't think you can take that and say you should do that in every situation in life. Yeah. So that's really interesting. There's a time for both. There's a time for peacemaking and there's a time for flipping tables, right?
Own husbands as to the Lord, which doesn't mean I will treat my husband as though he is the Lord. That's weird. It means that you're doing it unto the Lord, not just unto him. There's a third person that's more important. I'm going to honor God by yielding to my spouse. Husbands, it says in Ephesians 5:25, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So when you think of a reason not to love your spouse, you're like, well, look at us when Jesus died for us. How could I possibly have an excuse to be unloving at any point? When you look at 1 Peter 3, where it talks about wives, yielding even to an unsaved husband, it then concludes it by saying that this behavior is, quote, in God's sight, very precious. So I would want to see this person say, can you get your heart back to a point where you look beyond your spouse and beyond yourself and you look up to heaven and you say, I want to make you pleased with the way I live in my marriage? Or do I actually see you as annoying, God, because you're holding me bound to something I don't want anymore? And this is a real heart surgery issue, just to be real open and honest about where you're at and deal with it. So this is huge. Marriage often heads off a cliff because of one single unchristian belief. I won't do my part if they won't do their part. And that's to me, the thing I had to continually root out, especially.
Which is what Danny Silk would call, who's another pastor and counselor that I really like. That's what Danny Silk would call powerless language. And you don't want to be a powerless person. You want to be a powerful person. If you're letting other people control your decisions and determine the quality of your life, you're a powerless person. Saying, I'm only going to do what's right if you do what's right. I'm only going to show you respect if you show me respect. You're letting other people determine your good deeds. You're letting other people determine whether or not you manifest the fruit of the Spirit, whether or not you get good consequence from the decisions you're making in life. And that's how you find yourself up in a terrible situation. Again, by saying, I'm only going to make the right call here. I'm only going to play ball fair and good and respectfully and say good game at the end if you do that too. And, that's how, if both people say that, then you're just fighting all the time. There's a really good kids book called What If Everybody Did? I'm going to pull that up for you guys. I mean, it is really, really interesting here. What if everybody did children's book? I want to show you this. What if everybody did children's book? You can get it for $5 on Amazon. Seriously, I think this is the best kids book that was ever written. And you can see it on my screen here. What if everybody did? It's by Joanne Stover. And the whole book is about what would happen if every person in the world made the decision that you want to make right now. And it's basically teaching children that, what if everybody tipped over a chair? What if everybody jumped on dad's feet? What if everybody sat on the cat? What if everybody left their toys out and did not clean them up ever? What if everybody, did A, B, or C destructive thing? It might not be harmful, or it might be harmful, but it might not be as harmful if you're just doing it and nobody else is. But if you think about fairness, what if everybody made the decision you're making right now? Would the world be a better place? And of course, the answer is no. Just think about what would happen if everybody made one tiny bad decision all the time. The world would get really, really messy really, really quick. And again, that's powerless. That's the powerless person's attitude. I'm excused from my actions if you do the same actions. If you're making bad choices, I'm excused from my choices. If you are unkind to me, I'm excused from cussing you out. If you don't treat me the way you want to be treated, I'm excused from breaking the golden rule myself, right? And that's not how Christianity works, son. You're called to make the right decision no matter what, regardless of what other people are doing. You follow Jesus and don't worry about your brother, in a sense. I'm not saying don't worry about your brother. We are to care for people and all that. You guys know this. But you're responsible for you, and you worry about yourself, Don't examine the speck in your brother's eye before you pull out the plank from your own eye. Again, Jesus taught a plethora of things about this. Personal responsibility, taking accountability for the poor decisions you're making and not the decisions your brother's making. You've got to do that. And that's one way to have a good marriage.
Early first years of marriage. And now things are totally perfect. But at first, things are a little rough. No, of course not. But they're better than they were when we started figuring things out. And
I hear jokes like that and I get triggered, guys, because it is totally possible to have a really, really happy marriage. And I don't think it's easy, but I think it's if you make good choices, it doesn't have to be hard all the time, right? Lainey and I do not fight. We do not fight. We annoy each other. We have to solve problems by, saying that upset me or that hurt my feelings or that made me feel A, B, or C. And we have to solve problems by communicating to each other, but we do not fight. We do not yell at each other. I've never yelled at my wife, and I never will yell at my wife. She's never yelled at me, and she never will yell at me. And that's a conscious choice we're making. We're not going to do that. And so I get annoyed when people act like it's totally implausible for a marriage to be good. And it's not. It's not. The reason people think it's totally implausible for a marriage to be good is because they're making poor choices and they think it's impossible to make good choices. And it's not. And I know I'm not shouting from a high horse here. Our marriage has its problems, just like everybody. But my gosh, it's a good ride. And I'm okay with the problems it has. I'm not wishing I was out. I am reflecting every day on how grateful I am that I'm in. My life, pre and post marriage, are worlds apart. And man, I would never go back. I would never, ever go back. I would fight to the death in a gladiator ring before I would go back to my life prior to Lainey. And it's possible for you to have a marriage like that, guys. And I just want to encourage you with that today, because a lot of guys are under the impression that marriage is not a goal worth pursuing, or it's a goal that is too difficult to yield the fruits that you want to enjoy. And that is not true. If you make good decisions, which hopefully this show is teaching you how to do, when it comes to finding a mate and living and treating that person as Christ treated the church, you can have a great marriage. It's totally plausible, totally able to happen. And again, I could not recommend it more. So thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed the content we talked about in this episode. If you have, reach out and let me know what you thought of it through the link in the show notes. You can send me a personalized audio voice message. I would love to hear from you specifically. It would make me feel super connected to you as an audience member, and it would make this podcasting system two-way. You can also follow the show on Instagram and Facebook if you're interested in the content we post. Also, the link in the show notes is not there to send us a voice message anymore. It's just on social media. Anchor removed the link for voice messages. So send us a voice message on Facebook or Instagram telling me what you thought of this episode today, saying hello, just anything you want to say would be great. And thank you guys so much for listening today, and I will talk to you all next time.